Now, substantive policy reform when it comes to addressing Indigenous disadvantage has been largely absent from this election campaign. That hasn't stopped renewed calls for a meaningful commitment to the national agreement on closing the gap, which the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese commented on this morning.
We'll continue to engage with Indigenous people through the coalition of peaks, through individual meetings that we have. We continue to address the fact that we have a real gap in this country in too many areas. It is a tragedy that a young Indigenous male is more likely to go to jail than to university. We need to do better. All governments have failed First Nations people to do as much as we should have. That's something that I'm very committed to, practical reconciliation moving forward.
Well, Catherine Little is the CEO of the peak body for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, SNAKE, and has been a strong advocate for both major parties making a greater commitment to securing the future of children. And Catherine Little joins us now in the studio. Good morning, welcome to the program.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
On this election day, we've got a lot to get through. I wonder first if you would respond to what we heard from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese this morning.
Yeah, look, my job is always to listen for what's being said and what's possible, and you call it hooks. Were there things that signalled I'm going to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? I think I heard that. I certainly heard the reference to the Coalition of Peaks, which is primarily where the work of SNAKE leans into, and that's the national agreement. That's the one that says we're going to work with all governments, we're going to work with all departments, and we're going to get better outcomes for all of our families and all of our communities, and that means the broader Australian society as well. So did I hear those hooks in there? Absolutely. Did I also hear that we're being careful with language? Absolutely. And I think that's synonymous really with what we've seen over the course of the running of this election campaign, and that is, as the closer we get to election, the more twisting we hear and the more disinformation we hear relating to Aboriginal affairs. And at this point of the game, there's no chance for Aboriginal people to step in and have a say. So I suspect both parties are going to be very careful about anything they say on election day.
Yeah, and clearly you're referencing there Penny Wong doing the Batuta Advocate interview where she said in the future we might look back and say why was this even a fight, which then of course blew up as a major political issue this week.
Absolutely, and I saw it in another interview as well, and both of those I went, I'll go and just read what it says as opposed to the headline. And when I read it I said, oh no, that was far softer, it actually didn't indicate that. Yeah. Now I suspect after the election, again, bodies like mine, peak bodies, they always hit the ground fast and they say, we heard A, B, C, D and E. What we wanted to hear was F, F and G, and we're going to come in and we're going to say, well, what does this look like? And I suspect you're going to hear a lot of us, it doesn't matter who's in power, using the national agreement in particular to say, listen, we've got to have a better conversation about truth, because you can't continually use Aboriginal issues as a political football. And it's really easy to say political football, particularly in the race to an election, because there's so much energy. You know, people are in there. We're hanging our values and our beliefs off it. But when you think about the imagery of a football game and when it applies to Aboriginal people, and in particular Aboriginal children, it's actually a little bit uglier than that. Now we are kicking that football. Think about what a leather football looks like after a game. It is scuffed and it is bruised. And instead of picking up our children and nurturing them, saying we are going to invest in early education and care, we are going to make sure everybody has a safe home to live in, we are going to make sure you get medical treatment and disability supports as you need them, we will make sure that the environment you live in is safe, we go bang, here's a kick, and the team that gets the loudest roar is where everybody runs after. And when I think again about analogies, and I do this so everyone can see it, you know, when you're watching a game of football and there's a big hip and shoulder, people will roar and they will boo, and that anger that action has generated gets everyone on board. And what we're saying is to politicians, you don't need to do that to us. You don't need to do that to us. You can be kind, and you can accept that these things are really hurtful, because the things that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are dealing with are horrific, and they're things like our children heading out of home care systems at a rate and a scale that we've never seen before. And again, if you're not familiar with the child protection system, it's really easy to think because you're in child protection, your family did something wrong. Anyone who works in child protection, doesn't matter what department they work in or what part of the decision-making tree they work in, they will tell you that in some studies it shows that 75% of children in out-of-home care should never have been there in the first place. They're the sorts of things that we're dealing with. We're seeing tougher and tougher reforms come in instead of real commitments like stand up leaders, stand up and say we are going to invest in the things that keep children and communities safe, and stop having a silly conversation that gets people fired up and says, let's have another kick.
Yeah, and I think you're clearly referring to some of the conversations had there about Anzac Day and welcomes to country that we're not going to get into here. A lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been saying to me post the referendum that they feel like there was, just to borrow your metaphor, to continue that one, this might be a bit laboured, a stepping off the field. Politicians, business, you name it. Everyone was stepping away from having those big conversations. But it sounds like you're a bit more optimistic than that.
Look, I think that's part of the nature of the work that I do. Right? My job is to always see where the blue sky is.
So spending a lot of time searching for it.
I do, and some days I'm not going to lie, particularly when you see Aboriginal affairs dropped like a hot potato. And I do lean into the second debate where they both stood up and acknowledged a massive failure in their approaches, and then silence until we needed to play another game. But my job is to always look for where those blue sky moments are and hook onto them. And what I'm hoping is that people will lean into their leaders better. Whoever you vote for, you can encourage your leaders to really step up to this and say there are really important issues out there, and they're experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at a rate and scale that is probably unfathomable if you're not Aboriginal. You know, we die at a really young age. You know, we just saw that horrific, you know, story about losing our fabulous footballer, you know, in his 40s. We hear stories about our children passing away when they fight by suicide, when most people are saying, let's get ready to celebrate your year 12. We're talking, and I know I heard it in your interview with the Prime Minister, that our children are a lot more likely to go to prison than into university. These are really serious issues that need really serious attention and solid policies, not big statements that make people angry and engage them and make people cheer, but the policies that deliver genuine action and genuine change, and that has to be done in consultation with the people who those policies affect.
Catherine Little, thank you so much for your time, and well, perhaps grounding is a good way to finish, sticking with the metaphors there. Catherine Little, CEO of Snake, appreciate it.
Thank you.